30 Days of Persuasion Plays with me, Paul Macetta. Welcome to episode 5. Very important episode, almost as important as the very first episode where I talked about the fact that people are emotional first and logical second. And the reason why this episode is equally as important is because in this episode we're going to talk about the factor that most determines your ability to persuade others. So what is it? It's your authenticity. So let me say that again so it's crystal clear. Authenticity is the factor that most determines how effectively you can persuade others. And the reason why is this. You could read every book, you could go to every seminar, you could invest in world-class training, you can learn every technique, strategy, tactic under the sun. The moment that people sense that you're not being authentic with them, it all goes out the window. So, authenticity trumps everything because people don't like to engage with people that they feel aren't being real with them. Because the minute they sense that you're being fake with them, they almost feel disrespected. They feel like you're insulting their intelligence on one level or another, and so they mentally tune out, and your ability to persuade them drastically decreases. Now, there's a caveat to this, and that is in the first tip that I'm going to give you today. And so the very first tip that I'm going to give you on this topic is that you need to find the balance between your authentic self and your persuasive self. So let me explain to you what I mean by that. Oftentimes when I sit down with people, whether it's through a coaching session or a strategy session on the phone, or maybe they email me and ask me for my advice on something, and I tell them, we talk about this topic, and they say to me, well, I like to be myself. And oftentimes what I see is that people sacrifice their ability to be persuasive for the sake of being too authentic. So let me explain what I mean by that. There are different versions of yourself. There's the authentic self, which obviously is very important. That's what we're talking about here. But then there's the persuasive self. And the persuasive self is the persona, the characteristics, the qualities that you have to take on in order to persuade your audience. So in essence, you have to take on a different role. So people often tell me, no, that's not true. I'm myself all the time. Well, think about this for a second. You're taking on different roles at different points in your life anyway, as it is. You don't act the same way when you're out having a drink with your buddies that you do when you're having a job interview, right? When you're on a job interview, you conduct yourself differently than when you're out with your friends drinking. You don't talk to your mother the same way that you talk to your boss, right? So context and environment have a lot to do with the way that you carry yourself. Now, if you want to be persuasive, you got to find that balance. See, oftentimes I see people too often at one extreme or the other. They're either too far at this extreme, trying to keep it real, and in the process, not being persuasive, or they're too far at the other extreme, almost trying too hard to be persuasive, and in the process of that, they're abandoning their authentic self. They're abandoning who they really are. So you have people all the way over here that just really don't care about what their audience thinks about them. They're too consumed with being themselves and keeping it real and being completely unconscious of what they should be doing for that audience to be receptive to them. And then you have people all the way at the other end of the spectrum that in the process of trying to be too persuasive are not actually being themselves. So what you got to do is you got to find that balance. You got to find that happy medium of being that persuasive person in terms of the context and the environment of what's going on, and then being your authentic self. See me, I teach people influence and persuasion. Most of the people that teach this stuff have PhDs or some kind of high level college degree. Well, when I decided to go into this space and start teaching it to people, I immediately realized that that's something that I don't have. So what did I do? Did I go around and try to pretend like I was a professor? Did I try to talk like an astute college person? No, I let people know straight from the gate, from the very beginning. I barely graduated high school. Not that I was dumb, I just had no interest in that type of learning. I did exactly what I needed to do. I did just enough to get by and pass so that I could graduate high school and do what I really wanted to do, which at the time I didn't know what it was, but I knew that it didn't involve going back to school. So that type of formal education really was never for me. So I don't pretend that it was. I tell people straight from the gate, I don't have a college degree. I don't have a PhD. I'm not a classically educated person. And you can tell by the way I talk that I'm not. I'm a guy from Brooklyn, New York. So I don't try to sound like a guy from Milwaukee. Right? I am who I am. But make no mistake, at the same time, I take what I do very seriously. I try to conduct myself in a manner that's most conducive to what I believe my audience wants. So step number one is you got to find the balance between your authentic self and your persuasive self. And believe me when I tell you, if you want to become a master communicator, you have to first accept the fact that all people from all walks of life take on different roles at different times. And the master communicators know how to do that better than anyone else. Second thing is, you got to trust in your knowledge, your expertise, and your credibility. Because oftentimes, what I see when people start acting fake or they start deviating from who they really are, so those are the people at this end of the spectrum that are trying too hard to be persuasive, and in the process, they're not being who they really are. Oftentimes, the reason for that is because they lack confidence in a certain area. Maybe they're afraid that they don't have enough knowledge or expertise. Maybe they're threatened by their competition. Maybe they're afraid that they're going to get asked a question that they don't have the answer to. And so, as a way of compromising or a way of kind of covering that up, what manifests is lack of confidence. And so that lack of confidence causes them to say things that they normally wouldn't say, to think of ideas that they normally wouldn't think of, and to just start deviating from who they really are because they're afraid they're going to get exposed. So, and you know what? The preface to that is you actually have to do the work. You got to put in the time to become an expert, to build credibility, to actually know what you're talking about if you plan on persuading somebody to your way of thinking on a specific topic. You have to know about that topic. You got to master that topic. But at the same time, if you put in the time, energy, resources, money, and work into that, then be confident in who you are. That will help you find that balance between your authentic self and your persuasive self. And last but not least, the last tip that I want to give you is to focus more on being persuasive than being right. And so again, oftentimes, this is another issue that I see with people that can't find that balance. So now, in the last tip that I gave you, we talked about trusting in your knowledge, credibility, and expertise. That's for people that sway too far to this end of the spectrum, and in an effort to be ultra persuasive, they start sacrificing who they really are. This last tip is for the other people that sway to the other end of the spectrum and are trying too hard to be themselves, or they're keeping it too real, so to speak. What those people are doing essentially is they're too focused on being right, and they're not focusing enough on being persuasive. So here's a typical example. If I was trying to sell you a car, the context of the interaction is I'm the car salesman, you're the customer. My job is to get you to buy the car. And in the process of that happening, you're going to say things, I'm going to say things, and my end goal is to persuade you to buy that car. Well, let's say in the middle of that conversation, I don't know, we start talking about sports. And you tell me that Bill Belichick was coaching the New York Jets in 1992 when they won the Super Bowl. Just throwing an example out there. And I'm like, no, he wasn't coaching them at that time. Somebody else was. And you're like, no, I'm pretty sure it was Bill Belichick. And next thing you know, you and I start getting into this debate about who was actually coaching the Jets at that point. And now the context of the conversation has went from trying to prove each other wrong about who was coaching a football team at a certain point in time versus what the initial goal was, which was to make a sale. And oftentimes I see this. In fact, I see this more times than I would like to admit. I see people focusing too much on being right rather than being persuasive. So, circling back, 3 things you got to do. First, you got to find the balance between your authentic self and your persuasive self. Second, you got to trust in your expertise, knowledge, and your credibility so that you don't start deviating from your authentic self and trying to be somebody that you're not. And then the last thing is you got to focus on being persuasive rather than being right. So avoid arguments, avoid trying to prove people wrong, avoid making the entire situation about you and make it about them.